Welcome to Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger. I'm Ami McReynods, your host and the Chief Equity and Programs Officer at Feeding America. Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger is a series of conversations with everyday leaders who are disrupting the systems of inequity that drive food insecurity across this country. We acknowledge that many of the systems that drive food insecurity are deeply rooted in inequity. As solutions are developed to address food insecurity, we must listen and learn from people with lived experience to ensure that those solutions don't create additional harm and perpetuate injustice. On today's episode, we're focusing on the importance of sharing power and building equitable partnerships in ending hunger. Nicole Robinson is the Chief Partnership and Programs Officer at Greater Chicago Food Depository, and Melvin Thompson is the Executive Director of Andaleo Institute, a community development organization located in Chicago's South Side neighborhood of Washington Heights. Washington Heights is a historic neighborhood that originally built up around Chicago's railroads in the 1800s. Throughout the years, its community has stayed vibrant and strong. But like many predominantly African American neighborhoods in Chicago, years of discriminatory policies and systemic underfunding have hit hard. Its residents face documented health disparities and disproportionately high levels of unemployment. If you live in Washington Heights, you're statistically more likely to live a shorter life than the average Chicagoan. And this was true before the pandemic. As COVID-19 hit, Nicole and the Greater Chicago Food Depository approached Melvin about the possibility of creating a long-term partnership to meet the increased demand in the community. I think I'd like to kick off the conversation maybe with a question to you, Nicole. So, Greater Chicago Food Depository has been serving the city for over 40 years. What are some of the unique challenges that you find in fighting hunger in Chicago?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me today. And, yes, Chicago is a unique community. We have been at this for over 40 years, and we've grown tremendously in that time frame. At one point, we were a food bank that distributed 500,000 pounds of food. Wow. And now in a post-pandemic, as we continue to navigate to pandemic, we're at 120 million. And that growth is a reflection of the need. It's a reflection of people that support this work, but it's also a reflection of some deeper, complex problems in Chicago communities, and including the food system, where we have a legacy of racial injustice and policies that over time have shaped how much income and wealth people have. It's shaped agriculture. It's shaped whether or not we have grocery stores in communities. It's left us with some unaddressed trauma. Yes. So it's so complex, and the disparities have just gotten deeper and wider in Chicago, where, there's a 17-year life expectancy gap between Black and Brown communities and white neighborhoods. When I look at the data at the food depository, in some communities, there's rates of food insecurity in the 30 to 50% range.
Wow.
People don't have incomes that support the cost of living. There was double-digit unemployment before COVID. We talk about it now, and we're shocked that there's double-digit unemployment, but there was really a silent pandemic before that. Economists say that, the economic stress has been the leading indicator of what's happening in the pandemic, but we've had a year of racial conversations about racism, and some would say that's the leading cause. So, I love Chicago, but it's complicated, but I feel like, those are a lot of what the things that I see.
Nicole, I'm listening to you and my jaw dropped, right? Just hearing some of the statistics that you just shared, right? About what's happening in the city of Chicago and why that creates such a unique landscape and challenge for people who are living in the city, Black and Brown people in particular who are living in the city. So I'm curious. I know that the Food Depository has been evolving its approach to working with communities that are experiencing food insecurity. And I think that also includes how you're engaging in community partnerships to address issues around food insecurity and racial inequity. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening there?
Absolutely, Amy. And if forgive me if I sounded a little sobering with that data because that kind of rolls off my tongue because I've talked
Please be
about it a lot.
sobering. I think it's important that those statistics are shared. So thank you for bringing those to the conversation.
Yeah, but the silver lining in all of this, because it is, we may not all see it, but the silver lining I see is, how it's all transformed us as individuals and institutions. And there's a set of values that the Food Depository brings to this work that I personally bring to this work that I think is going to get us to better. One being centering communities most impacted by the work. So I ran through a list of statistics, but those are people who live in neighborhoods, who live in homes and walk blocks and ride public transportation and gather together. And I need to center the work on them. We need to center the work on them. We need to ground our partnerships and think about them differently and expand the definition of who it means to be a partner. We're a food bank, and we have a legacy of partnering with a narrow list of organizations, who serve as food pantry partners. But we know that there's a dynamic, vibrant group of partners equally committed to a broader set of issues around justice. So not just food justice, but economic justice, housing justice, health justice. And those partners care about this work too. So I think, those values informed our work. And what that led us to is a set of really, interesting, transformative commitments, things that the Food Depository had never done before in our history. And it was all in the spirit of creating strengthening the food system, because what we learned during the pandemic is kind of how fragile things can be. What can happen in the blink of an eye when our structures kind of don't support us in the way that we need them to. So what that resulted in us doing is investing $2.6 million in 26 organizations across Chicago, all Black and Latino-led organizations, some of which would open new pantries. And Melvin is one of those partners that we're excited about. The investment is one thing, and that's the what, but the how is what's different.
Yes.
Trusting partners who know the community really well. So when I talk about the blocks in the neighborhoods, they know Miss Jefferson in the neighborhood and what she needs and what she's thinking about, whether or not, someone's checking on her. So I think we wanted to empower the organizations that have that level of wisdom and insight and have the know-how, and just say, tell us your vision, tell us how you want to bring it to life, and we will support you. And that's very different, because we're an organization that just structurally is an organization built on policy, process, structure. That's our strength, actually. But we had to sort of release that a little bit.
Yeah.
Release that a little bit in the spirit of honoring those values around power and trust. And how do we actually build up community in a way that, there isn't a need for a pantry one day.
Mm-hmm. Nicole, this question that you ask around tell us your vision is a very powerful one. And Melvin, maybe I can turn to you, sir. I would love it if you could first share with us a little bit about your community. Tell me about Washington Heights. And then I'm also just curious if you can also share what Nicole is sharing. Does that resonate with you?
Wow. Well, thanks for having me here, Amy. This is a privilege and a pleasure. everything she said. I was so busy trying to write notes of everything that Nicole said resonates with me. Um, just a little bit about the Washington Heights community. Sure, it's located on the far south side of Chicago. You can find it roughly along the 95th Street corridor. And it's a very strong, historically stable, middle class, predominantly African American community. It also contains a low rise public housing development within that space. And one of the unfortunate parts of that is that that community is very much insulated from the rest of this middle class, stable community. And that in itself creates a real dynamic, even with people who reflect, the same population. And so the complexities of our issues aren't all monolithic. I mean, we have some of the highest home ownership rates in the entire city of Chicago. And when I discovered that a few years ago with this report that a regional planner put together for us, I said, wow, I mean, we need to be looking at our communities through the stronger lens, the asset rich anchors, instead of looking at the lack all of the time, right? And so, that's the kind of like the soapbox that I perch myself on the things that are positive in our community. Our organization, the Andaleo Institute, is birthed from a very strong African American church that sits adjacent to that public housing development that I mentioned, Trinity United Church of Christ. This month, since it's April, we're celebrating our 60th year in that community. So we are rooted in social and economic and environmental justice. And so for us to partner with an organization such as the Food Depository that's been around 40 years, and show us the kind of deference that they have. No one asks a small organization what your vision is, right? That is a rarity. But what I'm finding are organizations that are typically not found in those spaces changing their narrative to defer to organizations that are on the ground, because the structural systems that Nicole alluded to are what they're more comfortable with. But in order to really move the needle, I think what the pandemic has done has really shone a light on the situation. It's commonly said in our communities that when the rest of the country catches a cold, ours catches pneumonia, right? And so in our community, we've got a severe case of pneumonia going on, and so what it has done from a silver lining perspective is just illuminated how bad the patient is, right? It's really, and as strong as our community is, we're one paycheck away, we're one pandemic away from being, into oblivion, right? And so the timing of this partnership to see that emergency food distribution is not going to outlast the need, the growing need that we're seeing across the country. And so the permanency of food and healthy food is endemic to the survival and whatever potential we have to thrive in these communities has to be in a partnership such as this.
So, Melvin, let me ask you. I mean, you start talking about the partnership. And I know when we spoke earlier, you talked about the fact that Washington Heights is considered a food desert, but you had been living there and you didn't even know, like, that it was officially considered a food desert. So, what is it? How does it feel to uncover it or learn about sort of data or statistical proof of what I imagine you and others in your neighborhood must have been feeling for quite some time.
Yeah. I think Nicole mentioned the word sobering.
Yes.
Sobering validation. That's what I would
Mm,
categorize that. I remember the researcher, a Chicago-based researcher here, Mary Gallagher, really popularizing that term maybe around 2011, 12, and I had never heard food desert. I'd never heard that term, and then realized that what we were getting ourselves accustomed to when grocery stores were leaving our neighborhoods probably 2 decades ago, we were actually in the throes of this emerging food desert that had never been given a name because it had slowly become part of the fabric of our community. And so jumping in our
mm,
cars and driving outside, 4, 5, 10 miles to our favorite grocery store became the norm. So it wasn't until
right.
we placed the name, and then we learned just a few years ago when we were applying for USDA grants to support our church's farmers market that we were in fact designated by the U.S. government as a food
Wow.
desert. And I'm like, why didn't they tell us? What, come share
Right.
that information and tell us. And why do we have to apply for grant money? Just come give it to us because you know better than we do that we're, experiencing a lack of access to things that, the
Yes.
kind of sustenance that we need. And so then you get all of this follow up research that starts to tell you as a result of these food deserts, our lifespans are way far shorter than our counterparts in neighborhoods just 10 or 15 miles away from us, right? And
That's
so
right.
and so and so it's more and more research about the gloom and doom about what's going on in these communities, but no solution based research, right? Just
Right, right. And
yeah.
Melvin, I mean, just to that point, right? You talked about how the community is designated a food desert, but you had shared a story about dialysis
Yeah.
centers in the
Oh my
community.
goodness. One of the multiple partnerships that we have with health institutions and academic researchers is our partnership with Northwestern Medicine. And we were connected through the Center for Community Health to a fantastic doctor, Dr. Janae Simpson, who is the
Yes.
lone African American female kidney transplant surgeon in the state of Illinois. And
Wow.
we got connected because our partners at Northwestern would hear me, ad nauseum talking about the need for a grocery store and healthy food. The first time I had a chance to talk to Dr. Simpson, she shared with me this overlapping map that she created of low to moderate Black and brown communities that are designated as food deserts, right? And then she overlays that with this just preponderance of kidney and dialysis centers that just are pervasive in those areas. So
Mm,
low income food deserts and kidney dialysis centers all fitting like a glove in this map. And it completely blew me away. And when I asked her, well, what is the underlying reason for why that fits together so to make that perfect storm? And she said it's lack of nutrition. Melvin, it's very easy, and that's why the partnership with Dr. Simpson is so instructive because she is a champion for nutrition education. We're trying to place healthy food in our community, and so rather than Melvin standing on a soapbox alone, he's got the science to back it up.
as you said earlier, right? Another sobering validation
Yes.
in seeing that visual in that way. Nicole, I'd love to hear from you about your partnership with Melvin and Andaleo Institute. I know it's relatively new since the pandemic. Why Andaleo and Melvin, right? And why this community specifically?
Well, Amy, it might be obvious after just listening to Melvin. Why Melvin? Why Andaleo? The reality is, and Melvin said it right. The Andaleo's connected to church community, Trinity United Church of Christ, and they were one of several Black and Brown led institutions that during the height of the pandemic, so back to May 2020, where our sort of all of our heads were about to explode about what was happening and how we were going to respond to the need. They stepped up. And I can remember calling people during the pandemic and saying, hey, I know you don't normally do this, but your institution is in a high need community of which Andaleo was, and we need help. And we need help setting up these pop-up food distributions. And I can remember asking the church, I just need you to do it for 6 weeks. Start this in May, do it for 6 weeks, and them along with several other organizations. That's what I need. What wound up happening is a commitment that lasted through Thanksgiving of 2020 because the need was so great. But the commitment was there, and it was a selfless commitment because it was still during that time of shelter in place, restrictions on where we could go. Communities were exposing themselves. So I think we were grateful to that. I think what happened is sort of this inspiration between us and all of the partners, including Andaleo, and some of the values, the impact that came out of that partnership inspired us to go forward with this idea of, basically we had an RFP and we said, we invited organizations like Andaleo to again, tell us your vision. Where do you want it to be? What architect do you want to use? How do you want young people engaged? What paint do you want on the wall? I mean, we said, tell us what you want. And, that is evolving. Andaleo is one of the partners who stepped up. And I think what's interesting about Andaleo and some of the other partners is they are social justice institutions. So before the pandemic, before George Floyd, they were all acutely aware of the inequities, just as Melvin talked about. They were focused on public policies to help reduce the wealth divide. They were focused on how to connect community to employment opportunities. And I think in a pre-pandemic world, probably wouldn't have thought about a food pantry and a food depository. And so I think we both had a moment where we said, you know what, we can work together. And this is just the beginning. So,
yeah. What did you think about this opportunity, Melvin? Why did you decide to engage?
Because the moment was a time for pivoting. It wasn't in our wheelhouse. If you had asked me just a few minutes ago about a food pantry, I would have given you a strange look, but you saw the need, the shelter in place. There had to be something different that we needed to do as an organization. I've told my staff many times over the last several months that there's no way we can still be the same organization we were before the pandemic, right? So there's a different need now. This is still connected to the health conscious corridor, which is part of our mission, which is our vision. And so it was an opportunity that actually presented itself ahead of schedule, right? But we were prepared, and we had a backbone of a church with 10,000 members and 70 different ministries and an ongoing food share ministry that's been operational for at least 30 years that already knew kind of like the lay of the land. And then when the idea arose to expand this and create more permanency, I really thought that this could be a beacon and the first iteration of that access to healthy foods in our community. So, sometimes you can plan a lot of things, and then things that are unplanned come in just at the right time and actually bolster what you're already doing.
Yes, and it sounds like you all had already done a lot of the groundwork and the foundation to evaluate this opportunity and see how it fit in.
Yeah, very much so. Yep, very much so. Very much so.
So Melvin, I know, sometimes engaging with a new partner or a large funding partner can unintentionally bring harm to a community. So I'm curious, how do you involve community members in that process? I mean, you talked about Washington Heights. How do you involve all the community members from different areas that need support in that process?
Great question. We have engaged in a process called community engaged research, which is nothing more than engaging as a community with health institutions, academic researchers, and in that, sharing information, sharing the particulars of our particular community that might be a little different from the neighboring community, right? And so having Andaleo be kind of the liaison to that engagement, and then most important, having researchers and health academic institutional people reflect the communities that they're coming into, because we focus in three areas at Andaleo: health, education, and community development. There's a line that our pastor emeritus used to say: "You can't be what you can't see." And so, to have research epidemiologists that look and reflect the communities that they're serving, some of that is new to community members to even see people in these positions. So there's a value laden aspect to this that goes beyond the information. It's just having a researcher come in and be able to tell their story to communities that are very similar to theirs. And so I saw that opportunity to engage these health professionals, and I was very careful to let them know that the deference that you show to the community will garner you the trust that is missing
Yes.
from these communities, and rightfully so. If you look at history of medicine in Black and Brown communities, right, there's a distrust, and so who am I to bring researchers in to the community with the audacity to say these people will at least listen and hear your stories and try to relate them to the science. And so we've been extremely successful in bringing those kind of partnerships, everything from prostate cancer among African American men with the University of Illinois at Chicago, pharmacy deserts that now exist in our community with the University of Illinois at Chicago, mental health and racism, and the impact on African Americans. I mean, just a whole litany of different issues that we typically have no voice in. Right? We typically have no voice. And so what these researchers have thoughtfully done is not come in with an agenda, a top down, here's what here's what we think. Better than that, this is what we think we heard from you, right? And so based on what we thought we heard from you, here are some things for you to consider. And so we kind of act as a bridge. Our community organization acts as a bridge to this population that has never been necessarily trusted, over researched, overly researched,
And
and
underserved.
underserved, right? So lots of stuff on the shelf, but no solutions based on that research. And so I heard that initially when we started to do this. Well, Melvin, is this going to be just another, people swoop in, get all our information, then we never hear from them again? And so being cognizant of that, I was very careful to make sure that there were follow-ups. So we'll do a partnership grant with an entity, and then we'll follow that up with a research grant partnership to show the community, okay, this is what you told us, and this is now what we'd like to research, what you told us, right? It's you start to build that bridge, right? And then there may be young people that aspire to serve their own communities and are inspired by the people that they see from a UIC or a Northwestern Medicine or a American Heart Association. And so it has a real, just immeasurable impact than we actually know. And that's why community engaged research undergirds all three of our programs.
Melvin, I heard so much in there. I heard one, that representation matters, right? Having diverse folks who are representative of the populations living in communities is very important. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, building cultural sensitivity, building trust. What I heard you describe was a way to build partnership with community, right? Not to come in and do to, sure, but to learn from, sure, and build, absolutely, with, right? And the transparency in that process. Absolutely. So it sounds like that's something that I hope we can see more communities engaging in, right? Bringing that voice to the table.
Yes.
This question will be for both of you, Nicole and Melvin. And again, Greater Chicago Food Depository, more than a 40-year history. Andaleo Institute, rooted in 60 years of history in the community. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine it's 10 years from now. So a decade from now, it's April 2031. What is it that you see happening in Washington Heights and the city of Chicago from an equity perspective? What's different? What's changed? What's happening? Maybe what's not happening any longer? What do you see 10 years from now? What do you hope for?
Ooh. Wow. The vision is a health conscious corridor. The mission is to revitalize our 95th Street corridor, the 2-mile stretch that, by the way, intersects with 5 different communities, 4 different wards, right? And so if we can create the kind of health conscious corridor that is undergirded with health partners, then we're going to be doing something that I think is unprecedented on the south side of the city, and will contribute to a complete renaissance that is actually built around a major transit station that we've just had completed over the last 2 years that is poised for an amazing $2.3 billion extension farther south. And so we're literally ground zero for development. And so we're excited to have strong partners. And what I see along that corridor are other like-minded entities that also have the same kind of reverence and respect for those health partners and those organizations that contribute to the social good, that want to set up shop there, right? We're seeing a pandemic that is going to see a lot of businesses not reopen in the downtown central business district. Here's a wonderful opportunity that 10 years from now, some of those businesses have taken a chance and relocated into the neighborhoods that they're seeing all of this revitalization. So I read somewhere, if your vision doesn't scare you, then it's not big enough. And I'm scared every day. I'm scared every day because I see the impossible possible over the next 10 years.
Yes. Well, Melvin, I tell you, I had my eyes closed and I have been on 95th, and I can imagine that corridor revitalized. Thank you for sharing that very clear vision. Nicole, what about you? As you think about the city of Chicago and the work that the Food Depository is doing, what do you see happening 10 years from now?
Yeah, I hope for one, I'm placing my bets on Melvin's vision. I want his vision to come true.
Yes.
But there's 77 neighborhoods in Chicago, and there are 40 of them that the Food Depository, we look at the data around, some of those statistics around unemployment and food insecurity. And they're at the top of our list because they have the highest rates of disparity across all of those issues. And I hope that their vision comes true too. And I think part of it is healing. Like communities have experienced a lot of trauma. Like we take for granted some of those statistics and the trauma that comes from that. Experiencing microaggressions of racism when you go to the store, when you're at work, when you're at school, feeling the weight of it when you learn that your neighborhood is a food desert. Some people call it food apartheid when there's a proliferation of fast food restaurants. So you feel like, people over time have felt like they didn't matter. So I think my hope for all of the communities is that, they feel seen, they feel heard, that they get some sense of healing around that. I hope that, you guys mentioned, harm, that we are on a track where all of the policies that we develop that sort of create community, they're not policies that take us in the wrong direction.
Right.
They're the policies that move us forward. And that communities achieve economic justice. Because when we think about, why people are food insecure, it's rooted in economic justice. It's rooted in racial justice. So I know that's a lot to want for communities in 10 years, but I know that that's what people need, because just like the plan that Melvin described, all 40 of those communities, many of them have a vision similar. It might be that they want farmers markets in their community. It might mean that they want a park where kids can play and there's no violence. There's not a crossfire from shots. They're all things that people want. And I want them all to come true. And part of what institutions like the Food Depository can do is, again, support organizations like Melvin, support their quality of life plans that they have to improve their communities and really make all of their dreams come true, and then make our institutions accountable. Because, again, part of why we're here is because of what we've been comfortable doing, what we've normalized around how we engage with community, and really just changing that so that how we act now, this idea around trust, sharing power, let's normalize that so that we're not having this kind of conversation.
And can I just add just one quick thing? Just if anything, we're not looked upon through the lens of a desert, but an oasis of fertile ground for opportunity in the whole belief system in our community, that you've got to get people to believe that things can change.
Well, Melvin, I think you said it well. Melvin and Nicole, thank you so much for this conversation that has been both sobering about the realities of what's happening today, what has been happening, and inspirational about how new ways of sharing power and investing in communities, and to your point, Melvin, having a belief about what can be different and then acting on that belief, a vision around that. Thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having us. So much.
Thank you, Melvin. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger. If you enjoyed our conversation today and want to get involved in the work Feeding America is doing to address equity and food insecurity, visit feedingamerica.org/act. Don't forget, share the show with others and be sure to subscribe so that you can get new episodes as soon as they're available. I'm Ami McReynods, and I look forward to continuing our equity journey together in the next episode.